2003, so I've been living on the property since then. I had bought a small farm, which is about 3 kilometers away from Iona, and prior to that. But my main job here is, partly because Andrew is such a brilliant marketer and I'm pretty shy, so the part of the farming that has really interested me is the physical farming, the actual growing of the grapes. I've always been interested in gardening, always been interested in growing things, and so today, because quite a lot of you may never have been to a wine farm or never seen vineyards being grown, I'm probably going to say quite a lot of obvious things, but I'm just going to show you anyway because it's quite interesting. I grew up on a sheep farm, so I didn't know too much about grapes 20 years ago, but it's been fascinating. And today we're standing in a block, and it's called Baba Pear, which means baby pear, and it was because it had a pear orchard in previously. So basically all the blocks on the farms, they become like your children, they all get a name. And some of the names don't really match what we do, because this is actually Sauvignon Blanc. It's a pretty unusual season in the sense that Andrew's heartbroken because actually the yields are really tiny. You'll see we've got tiny little bunches. This is going to, but I'm not actually terribly worried, because even though we're going to get small crops, which is not great for the bottom line, I always think that the quality you get in a low yield year, it's just out of this world. It's fantastic. So as I say, Andrew's a bit sad about getting such poor yields and such tiny little bunches. But if you look at the grapes, they're really beautiful. And you know, the stalks here are getting nice and brown. And when the stalks start solignifying, because they start out life grass green, pretty much like this. And when they start solignifying, basically that means that they're putting all their effort into ripening the little bunch that's hanging from it. So they're really starting to work now. This is not a time of the year where you want to be watering them. You just want all your energy to go into ripening these bunches. Also, unlike eating grapes, we want each berry to be really tiny. Because in eating grape, you want it to be nice and big, you want very thin skins, and you want no pips. With wine grapes, we want exactly the opposite. So we want a tiny berry with quite a bit of skin and pip, because that's where your flavor comes from. And so it's a completely different strategy to growing table grapes. But in terms of the canopies, you can see each vine starts life trained as a T-bar. So you've got the bottom of the T here, and you have these two arms, and off these arms you have these vertical shoots growing up, and generally each spacing is about 3/4 of, we use the clippers that we do our pruning with to kind of measure, and so our spacing is sort of 3/4 of a pair of clippers along, and on each luet here or stalk we have 2 bearers, and that's where your bunches are attached to the bearers. But we're going to probably pick these in the next sort of couple of weeks, maybe the next week or two. It's an incredibly early year for Elgin. Generally we don't start picking this early, but it's been a strange season. And also, the less crop a vine has, the quicker it will ripen. So we would expect to pick a little bit earlier for that reason as well. There's less work for the vine to do. It's not carrying as much fruit. It doesn't have to do so much work. In terms of farming, I'm pretty particular about what we use. Partly because when I started farming, I just did exactly what people told me to do. And at that point, we would just buy chemicals and we'd spray them, and we would buy chemical fertilizer and we'd put that on. And since then, I've become much more particular about what's happening to the planet and what's happening to our soils. And so a couple of years ago, about 12 years ago, we got some cows, and we started with 3 and we kind of worked our way up to 18. But having the cattle on the farm, I just felt, you know, viticulture is it's a monoculture, because these vines can't go anywhere. We can't pull them out each year and plant something different here and then put them back. So the vines have got to stay here, and also we want our vines to be here for a long, long time, because I think the older vines get, a little bit like people, they get a bit more character, and they give the wine a bit more character. So what we do to add diversity is every winter After we've picked, we will plough all of this up and we'll plant beans, we'll plant legumes, we'll plant ceradella, we'll plant lucerne, we'll plant oats. We just plant a whole mixture of things, clovers, rye, and we try and get a whole lot of different species in here so that we've got a little bit of diversity. And then we mow it in the spring and it all gets put back into the soil as green manure. So that's one way of feeding where you don't have to use chemical synthetic fertilizer. And if we do use fertilizer, which one has to, because the vine works really hard and you need to feed it at the end of the season, or perhaps in spring. So we use a wonderful product called Tolborn, which essentially was developed by some biodynamic farmers. And it's a very holistic, wonderful fertilizer. It doesn't leach out of the soil with the first rains and go into the water systems. That's the big problem with your commercial fertilizers, is it's a bit like taking vitamins, too many vitamins. Your body will absorb what it needs to. The rest is just flushed away. It just gets wasted, essentially. And so our underground water has been ruined by all this too much chemical fertilizer. But so that's a huge part of our farming. You'll see here we've got an irrigation line. We probably irrigate once a year at Iona. When we used to plant apples here, we used to use a lot of water. Vineyards are not thirsty and they don't need to be watered a lot. But it's very nice to have an irrigation system, and especially when the vines are young, because when they're little, they don't have a deep root system yet. And so the water's, it's really nice. It's a useful tool to have in the first 3 years where they're still kind of growing up. In terms of the leaves, you can see the leaves here. Now they're getting quite sort of tough and leathery, but it's the end of the season, a little bit of wind damage here. And your poor vine, it's getting a bit tired now. It's the end of a long sort of marathon for it. And I think it probably can't wait to get rid of these grapes now so it can just have a good rest in winter and gather its reserves again. So probably the prettiest time to actually see the vineyard is probably in early January, where it's still kind of full of flush of growth and it's looking really lush.